Thank you all for diving in. We got a small and mighty group this evening, but looking forward to some deep discussions with everybody, both here in person as well as online and Zoom land. So thank you all for being here and coming in the weather. So what we're going to do to kick off is we're going to have Steve, one of our board chairs here with this committee, go ahead and give us some words to help frame this evening, and then we'll move from there.
So it was probably over 40 years ago when I was in one of my admin classes, and I don't remember anything about the class or the textbook or anything, but I remember one line from it, and it was, the two things people care about the most are their taxes and their kids. And the only place that those two things intersect is our public schools. And we are under scrutiny for how we teach our kids and what we teach our kids. We're under scrutiny for how we spend our money and what we spend our money on. Now, thought about that in regards to the work that you're doing, because when we ask voters for their support, they scrutinize what we're asking for and what we're going to do with it, who it's going to serve, how it's going to serve. So thank you for coming, meeting after meeting, bringing your critical thinking skills, your analytics, your scrutiny, and all of that in order to make sure that what we're bringing forward is good for our taxpayers, but more importantly, good for our kids. So thanks for coming.
Thanks, Steve. Great. So just to kick us off this evening, we're regrounding our purpose. So we're in our 5th of 6 initial meetings as a development committee, where we're developing the capital needs of the district through community representative committee. And we're moving towards recommendations that we'll be bringing towards the school board. And more specifically, as we've talked about in our scope, as we've kind of gone through gathering data, looking at data, and coming up with ideas together, we're going to take a big step forward this evening in moving toward our recommended packages, where we're going to start building those with community input to bring in some key data to help take these final steps together as a development committee. So really excited to dive in concretely with us this evening, just to continue our process here that we've seen and to see it at the beginning of each meeting. To recap, in the last meeting, we heard our two key strategic buckets that we talked through. We heard from Brian with extracurriculars and athletics about different needs and data points there. We also got to hear from Whitney with nutrition services, and we got to hear from transportation, as well as hear about some other needed projects through fleet needs, both for safety and security and facilities and maintenance, as well as information about the print shop for the district as well. And we got to do some group discussion to share out emerging priorities from the groups there that were in alignment with what was presented. And tonight, we're going to go into a little more concrete, different type of format. And so this evening, you're going to get a chance to hear from some financial and pricing experts to really think about the monetary amounts that are associated with the projects we've been talking about and what's coming down the line, as well as the impacts for potential November 2026 bond in terms of the voter impact as well. And so we'll also get to hear a little more about the pricing process and what that looks like to start putting numbers to these projects we've been talking about and priorities we've been discussing. And we'll use that to start moving more concretely to a recommendation in terms of developing concrete bond packages for community input. And so this really cues us up in the next meeting in December to really be able to look at a series of concrete packages for us as a committee to be able to say, hey, here's our top 3 that we really want to move toward community feedback and community input as well. And so it's a big step forward in that, but a huge testament to the work that you've done throughout each of these meetings to be able to get us here. So really excited to dive in. And so with that, Scott's going to come up and introduce one of our guest speakers presenting this evening, and then we'll move forward.
Hey everyone, Lauren, can you hear us online? Okay.
I can, Scott.
I saw her come off mute, so I think she can.
Can you hear me?
While she gets established here. So Lauren McMillan is here from Piper Sandler. Lauren's been involved in public finance. She's probably a familiar name to many of you in the room since 2006. She's the managing director for public finance at Piper, and is a very well-known entity to all of us in public schools, cities, ESDs. She's a great partner. Piper Sandler won the Bidder of the Year award at the last OASBO conference, and Lauren is a huge piece of that leadership. So very happy to have her here tonight. She's going to walk us through kind of the bond process, how it works, how it works, and also hopefully answer questions. So, Lauren, thanks for being here, and I'll turn it over to you.
Wow. Thank you for that introduction. God, can you guys hear
I
me?
can't hear you. Hold on.
Oh,
Hold on, technical difficulties. Hold on a second.
Figure out the audio here. It's possible that. Can you just try to say some things, Lauren? We'll let you know when we can hear you.
should I just start singing maybe?
Wait,
Yeah, louder, Lauren.
yeah, louder.
You don't want that, trust me. Okay. So we're good?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you for that introduction, Scott. That's awesome. Yeah, I have been working in Oregon public finance since 2009, have worked with the district for a number of years, was a part of the last authorization. So happy to be back in front of you guys. I think tonight I'm just here to provide you some more information just about how bonds work as you embark on this process. It's not really straightforward. So it can get pretty complex. So hopefully this will give you some good background as you start working through this process. So I don't know, Beth, are you clicking through the slides or? Okay.
Yeah.
Great. So first off, also, I'm happy to take questions throughout if you just want to, raise your hand. I can't really see anyone, so just yell at me to stop talking and I'll check in with you guys every so often. But yeah, would love to keep this informal. If you have anything, happy to answer all of your questions. So first off, what is a general obligation bond? Well, bonds are really just loans that are broken into multiple pieces and sold to investors, usually. Multiple investors. It can be banks, insurance companies, individual folks who are just loaning you a piece of the money that you're borrowing. General obligation bonds, that term refers to the security or the revenues that are pledged to repay that loan. And in this case, it's a dedicated property tax levy. And it's also secured by the district's full faith and credit pledge. That's just like a little extra that means the district uses all legally available revenues to pay this debt service. So it makes it a really secure credit that investors like. Debt service is, just to confuse you guys, we have lots of vocabulary words that mean the same thing or, sound really fancy and they just, overcomplicate things sometimes. But debt service is a term that refers to the principal, so that's the amount that you borrow, and the interest that you pay on it. So debt service is just the annual payments that you're making on the bonds. And that is repaid again by this dedicated property tax levy. And you may hear it referred to as an unlimited GO bond. Now, that doesn't mean, you're unlimited in how much you could borrow or how much you can levy each year. What the unlimited refers to the actual levy rate that gets to be set. That is unlimited, but you can only levy the amount that you need to make those annual payments on the bonds. You can't levy extra and use it for other things. But the levy rate that is ultimately set is unlimited. It can be set as high as necessary to generate the amount that you need to pay debt service. We'll talk a little bit more about how the levy rate works in a couple slides. So because of all of these things, GO bonds are really considered the highest credit quality that a school district can offer. So there's lots of demand for school district general obligation bonds. And it's a really great tool. The one catch or hurdle that you have to meet is voter approval is required. Thank you. So again, these bonds are repaid with property taxes, right? So there are some key property tax concepts that are really important to understand as we work through some of the mechanics. So real market value, or RMV, is the estimated amount that a property could sell for, right? Like when you think of the value of your home, you're thinking most likely of that real market value. This is measured by the county assessor as of January 1 each year. Now, the assessed value, or the AV, is the value that is actually subject to taxation. So that's the value that's used in calculating your tax bill. And this assessed value, it cannot exceed that real market value. So you will never pay taxes on an assessed value that's basically more than the property could be sold for, right? But it's really important to note that especially for residential property, the assessed value is often much lower than the real market value. And you may know what your assessed value is for your property if you've looked at your recent property tax bill, and you can probably see there's quite a bit of a gap there. And we'll see some overall numbers for the district in a couple slides that will help illustrate this gap as well. So the bond levy rate is the tax rate to repay the bonds, and it's expressed in dollars per thousand of assessed value. So it is calculated annually, and it is set by the county assessor. So what's really important to know in how bonds work is that the issuer, the school district, is not setting the levy rate. And you cannot guarantee a levy rate. What we're going to talk about for, the future levy rate for this bond, I'm going to be really careful and try to always refer to it as an estimate or a projection, because the levy rate, again, is set every year by the county assessor. So we don't know what the bond levy rate is going to be even next year because it hasn't been set yet. So we are just making some assumptions and putting together a projection for that levy rate. What will be known for the district essentially is how much you need to pay each year, then an amount, a dollar amount, and that gets translated into a levy rate by the assessor. So in Oregon, your bond levy rate is not limited by Measure 5 or Measure 50. That means that it's not subject to compression. If you have no idea what I'm talking about, don't worry about it. Just know that it does not apply. Compression is a really unique concept of Oregon's property tax system that unfortunately reduces the permanent rate collections that the district gets, but bonds don't have to worry about compression. There are technically 4 election dates that you can tap each year: March, May, September, and November, but only May and November are not subject to this double majority requirement, where you would have to also have, 50% of registered voters turn out. And May and November are the only times the Awesome Grant is available as well. So really, there's only 2 chances for you to go each year. Now, you are limited into how much you can borrow for general obligation bonds. There is a legal debt capacity, but state law is really actually pretty generous, and it allows school districts to issue up to 7.95% of your district's total real market value. And the district has a very large real market value, so your legal debt capacity is actually about $3 billion. So that is quite high. And most districts, especially the large ones, don't get anywhere close to what their legal debt capacity is and how much they borrow, just because the resulting levy rate associated with getting close to that would just be so high. So what constricts issuers more is the levy rate that we're looking at, essentially the annual cost to the taxpayers, rather than that legal debt capacity. Now, the ballot title that you put together, which is essentially your contract with the voters, that's what they're going to see and vote on to be the most visible, it is required to include a not to exceed amount. So that's the amount that you are legally authorized to borrow. A permitted use of proceeds. So it's generally in the summary section, there's a list of kind of the intended projects that you want to use the proceeds on. And then maximum years to maturity, or the term that you want to borrow over. Similar to like if you were doing a mortgage, their term would be likely 30 years. Maybe you do a 15-year mortgage. But most districts borrow between 20 to 30 years. What you'll see is not listed there as a requirement is that levy rate. That is often included, but it is not required. So this is a sample ballot title. The form for everyone's ballot title is the same. You have word limits. You get this caption, which only has 10 words, and then the question, which has 20 words, but it's really fun where that second sentence is required and doesn't count against that word limit. Not confusing at all, right? And then you've got the summary that has the 175 word limit. So highlighted the kind of key things here. You can see in the question, we've got the amount. In the summary, you've got some bullet points listing the various projects they intend to use the bonds on. And then in the bottom paragraph, 20 years was their term. And then you can also see in the orange, and then I don't have the estimated part circled, but it does say in the lead up, the estimated to maintain recent average property tax rate of $1.83 per thousand. So again, estimate, you're not actually setting a specific rate. Okay. So what can you use bond proceeds on? Well, the definition now is pretty flexible. It has changed over the years, but now proceeds may be used for basically capital costs that have a useful life of 1 year or more. So that can include, kind of the obvious things, buildings, remodeling or new construction. It can also include purchasing land, but it also includes furnishing and equipping those buildings. And then, you can do things like technology. It's very, very flexible. So one thing to note is that the weighted average life of the bonds may not exceed the weighted average life of the projects. And what that means is you can't borrow over 30-year period and fund something like, let's say you only buy computers that maybe have a useful life of maybe 5 years, right? That's a mismatch. But this generally isn't an issue when folks are doing a lot of different projects, because you do get to weight it. So if you're doing a number of large construction projects that have a very long useful life, it means most folks don't have an issue borrowing over a 20-year period or even longer. Certain things like routine maintenance and supplies are not eligible, but like deferred maintenance is. And then any interest earnings on the proceeds must also be used in accordance with the ballot title. So also the Awesome Grant must be used on projects in the ballot title. So when thinking about what to include in that use of proceeds, you want to make sure it's flexible enough to encompass those additional funds as well. Okay. one key component for this estimate I've been talking about, basically what the bonds will cost, is interest rates. So, we're talking right now, it's November of 2025, and the district is considering, being on the ballot November of 26, so almost a full year from now. And then the bonds won't actually be sold until likely early 2027. So it's a ways away, right? And believe it or not, I don't know what interest rates are going to be in the future. So what can we do about that? Well, we can look at current interest rates, right? And you can see this graph goes back to 1996. And interest rates are constantly changing. That's what we do know, is they are very unlikely to be at the same place now in 2027. But we don't know if they will be higher or lower. So what we tend to do is be conservative and take current interest rates and then add a cushion over that to account for volatility between now and when the district actually locks in their borrowing cost. So the one thing here is we look at these two sort of benchmarks for different markets. The 20-year US Treasury bond is the gray, and then the blue is the 20-year AAA MMD index, and that's a benchmark for municipal bonds. Municipal debt gets a benefit of tax exemption, meaning that the interest income investors receive on your bonds is not subject to taxation. So they're willing to offer you a lower interest rate than they otherwise would. So that's great. You can see oftentimes that blue line is below the gray line because the actual, the US government doesn't get to borrow on a tax exempt basis. They borrow on a taxable basis. So different things can cause the market to invert or the blue line to go above the gray line. Things like, I don't know, you may remember 2008 when things went a little awry. Same thing with COVID, different things. But oftentimes these two markets are moving in tandem, and what happens in the treasury market can influence what happens in the municipal market. But, we never know exactly where things are going to go. So we just like to be conservative and hope we can meet or, exceed what we're looking at the moment. So the other really big component of modeling the cost of these bonds is the district's assessed value. So this is a table of the district's property values. And we've got 20 years of data here. So the top row is the most current data. This actually was just released for fiscal 2026. So recently that we actually don't have the real market value yet for this year. But the assessed value, kind of that middle column in the table, is the district's total assessed value. And it jumped a lot this year. You can see this note here. That's not sort of a natural growth thing. That was due to expiration of some property tax exemptions that were granted to Intel, right? So now some of that property is on the rolls. So it caused the assessed value to jump almost 30% this year. Outside of that, you can see annual growth in recent years is pretty strong, around 5 to 7%. And that is pretty strong for how Oregon's property tax system works. So assessed value growth is limited. Existing properties, the assessed value can only grow 3% per year. But the district can have growth in excess of 3% because new property also gets added to the rolls. So that's why you can see most years are above that 3% assessed value growth. But it's important to know that 3% is not a guarantee. That's not a minimum. This is looked at on a property by property basis. So most properties are going to be growing 3% per year. But you could have large industrial properties like Intel, or utility properties, other different types of property where the assessed value and the real market value are more close together. And if the real market value goes down, the assessed value also goes down. And we get a year like, what is that, 2019, where you had 2.66% assessed value growth. I think it's also interesting to look at the real market value. So in 2025, the district's total real market value was $38.6 billion. And the assessed value was only 22.76. So that gets back to the gap that I was referring to, where assessed values for a lot of properties is much lower than the real market value. That's an important concept to remember, especially when we're talking about, what is this going to cost me? That's what folks want to know most, right? And the tendency is to use the real market value when they think of how much it's going to cost. And we have to remind folks it's your assessed value, and that's often much lower. So the other thing I can't predict is growth in assessed value, right? So we do factor in some amount of growth in our projections, just because we know the district is very likely to continue growing in some way, but we're conservative on that growth assumption as well. So other thing to look at is what is going on with your existing debt, right? Because we need to factor that into the structure for a new borrowing, right? We want to make sure we're not popping up that levy rate. We want to layer this in when you have a nice drop, which is coming up after fiscal 2027. That kind of leads to the timing for the new issue, right? So the district has just two issues outstanding, which were for costs approved at the November 2017 election. And you can see in the graph there that the annual payments, kind of the annual levy rate, is projected to drop after fiscal 27. So that presents a nice opportunity for another bond to come on and not really increase that projected levy rate. So one thing we can also see in this chart is that, remember, we had that 30% AV growth this year, almost 30%, right? So what happened was your bond levy rate prior to that was up in like the 190s. And then with that sort of spike in assessed value, it brought the levy rate down this year to about 150. And so one thing that, when we're looking, we don't know what the levy rate will be in the future. And especially with that Intel property that's now on the rolls, it can be a little trickier with projecting kind of the growth, because they often will depreciate their equipment pretty aggressively. And so that could lead to some more volatility in that AV growth in the future that we're not used to seeing. But so the 3-year average levy rate for the last 3 years that we've actually seen is about 181. And that will come into play when we look at a new scenario. So there are many different options for new bonds that we could run. But two options that we've chosen to present today is basically how much could the district borrow if we maintain the levy rate that is projected for next year, which is $1.58, and then how much could you borrow over a 20-year period if we were targeting that recent average levy rate of about $1.81. And so these two options, the first one, if we target the lower rate of $1.58, can raise just under $312 million. And if we target the $81 number, we can get closer to about $380 million. Now, both of these, again, assume a borrowing in early 2027 and a 21-year official term, right? But 20 years of payments. And again, if you look at the bottom box of that first table, you can see the interest estimates. Again, we're including a cushion over current interest rates, right, of about 1.5%. And hopefully, rates don't go up nearly that much. That may mean that when we actually go to sell the bonds, we can either, shorten the issue, lower the levy rate. We have lots more options if rates go down. This just helps us hopefully meet our target if rates either stay where they are or they go up in the interim. And then some structuring assumptions down on the bottom right. We've built in AV growth of 3.5% each year. So if you think back to that AV growth table from a couple slides before, you'll remember that most years the district is growing more than that. And so what would happen is if actual growth comes in higher than the 3.5%, then the resulting levy rate tends to be set lower than what we're projecting. That makes people happier, right? The other way around, if we get too aggressive in our assessed value growth and then actual AV growth misses and is lower, the levy rate could be set higher than what we're projecting, and we don't want to do that.
Lauren, do you mind if I say something really quick here? So just by way of comparison, as a reminder, when we went out for the 2017 bond, what we told taxpayers at that time was we're anticipating your rate at $2.24 per thousand. And you can see based on what we just got done discussing that even without the Intel property coming out of the SIP agreement, we had already gone from $2.24 per thousand since 2017 down to about $1.95 per thousand. And then obviously the big jump with the Intel properties coming on the tax rolls. So we had a really great experience from a taxpayer standpoint with our last bond. And it's quite possible that something similar would happen this time. Of course, we don't know for sure, but we may start out at $1.80, and in a few years that may work its way back down again, depending on how growth plays out in our taxing area.
That's a great point, Beth. Thank you. Okay, so graphs. I like these more than, staring at all the actual numbers in the table. But so this shows you the graph on the left is, again, targeting that lower rate. The projected rate that we have calculated for next year is $1.58. And so we've got it's nice and level, right? It works out that way in the projection, and then you can see your historical levy rates are a little more up and down, and that tends to be how they actually get set, right? They never end up setting exactly straight. But the idea is to target that $1.58 until 2038, and then your existing bonds, one of the issues matures, and it creates this sort of step structure that we've just followed along with. So that would create another opportunity for a bond in basically either November 2037 or May of 38. So it gives you, it's about a 10-year window. You'd open up another opportunity for an additional bond. And same structure with the second scenario, we've also got those steps built in. It's just that the blue bars in the first 10 years are a little bit higher, again, targeting that average levy rate of $1.81-ish. And you may be wondering, well, how does this compare to other districts? What are other districts paying? And this table I love because, you've got a lot of information here. So this is sorted on a total tax rate basis. So it takes into account the permanent rate, which is what districts get for their operations, right? And you can see everybody has a different permanent rate because Oregon's property tax system is super fun. So everybody's got a different permanent rate, and then some folks have a local option, and then most of this group has a bond as well. And sorted on a total tax rate basis, you're towards kind of like, in the middle, leaning towards the bottom with a total burden of just about $6.50. I also like the additional information on here, which is looking at how many kids each jurisdiction has, and also the assessed value. Because when you're comparing to, let's say, Beaverton, right, who's definitely close by, you guys have a big tax base, right? But Beaverton's is even bigger. Their assessed value is over 40 billion. And then same when you compare to Portland. Portland is over 72 billion on their assessed value. So that's just an important concept. $1 on your tax base versus $1 on Beaverton's tax base, it raises, you raise much less, right? And same with Portland. So this chart is just the same data that we just saw, just in graph form. So you've got the gray bars are your permanent rate, and then yellow is local option if a district has it, and then blue on top. So just same data, different way of looking at it, and we've got Hillsboro highlighted in there. And then sometimes folks just like to look at just the bond rate. How do we compare if we are just looking at the bond rate for folks? And your bond rate is very much towards the lower end of this group, right? Highlighted there in yellow. I always love when Gladstone is on a chart because they actually have one of the highest bond rates in the state, and they have for a long time. So Gladstone and Hermiston have really flip-flopped with that honor for a number of years. So that kind of gives you a good idea. That's really the upper bound, just over $4. I think they're about $4.30 or so is where they've been. But you guys down at $150 this year, even if you were to go back up to the $181, it doesn't put you, it doesn't shift you around in the pack really substantially. You'd leapfrog over, 3 districts, but you're still squarely kind of in that middle to lower end on the bond rate side. All right. How am I doing on time? I don't want to chat too much. I can't find the time on here.
Maybe Lauren summarize the awesome grants, because I think most of the audience knows a bit about that, and then maybe leave some time for questions. That works.
Perfect. I can do that. So, what are your odds? This is just very generic overall numbers. I'm not, a campaign consultant. There's other folks that do that. But what the data suggests is there a slightly higher approval rate for a May election as versus a November election. But this, again, varies by district, and so many different things impact this. But overall, if we're looking at this, just over 60% of Oregon school district GO bond issues have passed from May 2010 to May 25. This doesn't include the election that we just had. It wasn't great. It wasn't really helping these statistics. But yeah, just about over a 60% overall approval rate. And next slide So there's this great program that was this around? It may have just started when you guys did your last bond, but the Oregon School Capital Improvement Matching Program, lovingly referred to as the Awesome Program. I know ODE thinks they're very clever when they came up with that, but it is great and it provides state matching dollars for school district GO bonds. Basically, you have to get a GO bond approved in order to access these funds. The amount is authorized by the legislature each biennium, so that does shift around a little, but we've seen about 32 million available each election, and that hasn't been soaked up each round. So then it moves forward. So sometimes there's 70 million available at an election, depending on how things have gone. The grant that you're eligible for, it's a range. So some school districts are only eligible for just over 6 million, and some are eligible upwards of $12 million. There's a lovely formula and ranking system that figures this all out. Oh, I didn't get this changed, but basically you guys are eligible for just over $8 million. And so that means even if you can borrow more than that, you'll have a bigger bond than that, but the max grant amount that you'll be able to access is $8 million. So it helps. The grant, this is just more data on, approval stats. And the takeaway is that having this grant is great, but it doesn't make it a slam dunk. It doesn't automatically get your bonds approved. The approval rate for districts with the Awesome Grant varies quite a bit by election. And it just means that you still have to put in the work, which you're doing right now, right? With this committee, getting input and trying to craft the right package for your voters and to be successful. You do have to sort of apply and get this facilities assessment and long range plan put into place. So it's kind of a long timeline, which you guys are in a great position. Starting early, you've got this all kind of started as you should. So for November of 26 election, these plans are going to be due to ODE next July 1st. And then the application, which is a very short one pager, is due 15 days after that. But basically ODE says you have to have your plans on file before you can actually put in an application. And that's it.
Thank you, Lauren. That was great. Just see if there's any questions in the audience. Yeah.
On that Awesome Grant money, does that have to be utilized the same way
Could you hear the question, or I can repeat it, Lauren?
Could you repeat it, please?
Sure. Yeah. She was asking for the Awesome Grant. Does that have to follow the same restrictions as the bond, the money that's gained through that?
Yes, you have. So when you're contemplating your list of projects, you have to include what you plan to use the grant on as well. So you don't have to identify what sub-project the grant will go to, but you can, if you think of it as just your total pool of funds, the grant goes into that, and then you have your whole laundry list of projects. It can be spent on anything that's included in the ballot table.
Thanks, Erica. Any other questions? Yeah, Robert?
For the past month or so, we see everybody's presentations. I didn't take note of how much each group wanted. But what is the total amount that each group was hoping to get approved for their section? And how does that compare to the $1.58 and then the $80.76 or whatever it is?
That is coming in our next few slides.
You're good lead in. We're going to talk about that next. Yep. Very good. So let's table that for just a second. Yes, in the back.
Can you share how much the Awesome Grant was
8 million last time. I think Saida was saying that this time we qualify for 7. So I don't know what that differential is between the 7
Yeah,
and
you
the
guys,
8.
I just looked it up. You are now eligible for actually, 6.126 million. The difference is they changed the formula that they use to allocate the funds, and now there's our tiers, and it depends on basically how you stack up against other districts, basically on like an assessed value per ADMW metric. And so, basically the districts that have a higher assessed value per ADMW, they're going to be in the lower tier and they're going to be eligible for less. So it means basically you guys have really good assessed value per ADMW compared to a lot of other districts. And so I think that's why it shifted.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions for Lauren? Okay, thank you, Lauren. Really appreciate you coming in and presenting. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Good luck.
Did you want to do this? Did you want me to do this? Yeah, but okay. So this is kind of the answer to Robert's question that he just raised. So again, here is that table that shows you what we could potentially raise given the scenarios that we've chosen to present tonight. One is keeping the rate stable at what we anticipate to be $1.58 per thousand of assessed value next fall. The other would be looking at a 3-year average from this year and the previous 2 years to come up with a rate of closer to $1.81, just under $1.81 per thousand. And if you take into consideration the entire list of projects that has been presented to this group over the last couple months, that totals about $640 million. Just to give you a sense of the scope and scale of the need in the district. So when you start thinking about, do we want to target a bond ask that is just about half of that, or that can get us a little closer to, not really 2/3, but at least it's inching closer, 380. And actually, to give you a little further context, our department heads and area leads that have been inputting these projects into what we call our big priority matrix that I know Burke's going to talk to you about, we have asked them to go through actually multiple times and check their answers to prioritize those projects from level 4 being the highest priority down to a level 1, which is a little bit more of a nice to have. And just to accomplish the level 4 projects, as it stands right now, would be almost 380 million. So what we have talked about as a bond steering committee is that we feel pretty comfortable with the messaging that would surround that 3-year average and going for the $1.80 to $1.81, and especially given the historical context of, the fact that just the year before last, it was $1.97, and at our 2017 bond, it was $2.24. Like, we're not trying to, I feel like that's still a representation of being good stewards of our community's money, like going for the things that we need without raising their rates beyond what is really kind of an average amount that they've seen in recent years, lower than what they've seen in recent years. So that's kind of the scenario under which we're going to continue this conversation. But I guess what I would invite now is if anybody has serious heartburn about that philosophy, this would be the time to surface that. No judgment if you want to challenge that philosophy. Okay, well, it's not that that's just a moot point and ended. If anybody wants to talk about it later, we totally can, but we're going to move on. Do you want to go into Brooks and then a break, or break and then Brooke?
There were no questions. I have one observation from the slide deck we just saw. Can you go back to the one that was called comparable levy rates? I just thought it would be interesting to draw an arrow between the second.
This one?
If you drew an arrow from Hillsboro's existing bond rate,
Travis, can you go to the right, sir?
Yeah, maybe.
oh yeah, thank you, Steve. I thought it would be interesting to just draw a line from here over to here, where the bond rate that we're contemplating asking our voters to vote for would still put us to the right-hand side of Beaverton, David Douglas, and therefore not be an extraordinary ask. I think, as Beth was just stating. Thank you for hearing me.
Travis, that does not include like either one block, levy.
Then you'd have to go to this, this one right here.
Beaverton, with the yellow bar stacked in there, representing their local option levy, their overall tax burden is significantly higher than theirs.
Yeah. And if we went for the $1.80, we would basically be even with Gaston's overall rate, which is just the next one over from us, considering this representation, which includes local options as well.
And then
That would keep us go lowest in the county.
Lowest in the county. Yep. All right. I see that Carolyn has a question. So we are going to, okay, go ahead, Carolyn.
Thanks, Beth. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Perfect. So not so much, I don't have heartburn or anxiety about it, but I guess I look at it a little differently. I think that we have to identify the things that we believe are important for the district. I personally don't think only going for level 4 is the appropriate thing. It puts us too far in always trying to play catch up. I'm a firm believer, and when we did bonds in the past, we need to be really articulate about why we need what we need, and also the messaging about the cost. But if you can keep that dollar amount, below the Beaverton and some of those, then I think it's appropriate. I'm not wedded to just the 380. I personally would push it a little more, as long as there's very clear reasons and we can articulate why it is that we are asking for what we're asking. So just wanted to let you know that that number doesn't scare me.
Well, thank you, Carolyn. And I can say, for the good of the group's knowledge, that initially when Lauren ran an average, she did a 5-year average. And that amount took into account the actual last 5 years. So this year and then 4 years previous. The way and that number was closer to the $1.97, $1.98, which is where we were 2 years ago. And just that amount, that extra 15 cents per thousand approximately, generated almost $100 million more dollars. Just so you know, it would be more like a $475 million bond. So it is something to keep in mind, to consider. I know we have Jeremy online. He's our bond marketing consultant. And, that he'll tell you, as I am about to right now, that is something we could poll on. Like if our committee decides that that's really something we'd like to ask in polling of our community, like what's the willingness to potentially go there, we could certainly do so. Any other questions before we have a quick break? If not, let's go ahead and take a 8-minute break. Evan's giving us 8 minutes. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. Okay, to recap, it's a spreadsheet. We've listed every project that the district has articulated as a need. And there is grading criteria that we have added. And at the end of the day, this is to track cost. So one thing you see, there's the most red column with the blue header. That's where we have provided each project in the district with a score, articulating if it's a level 4, which is absolutely critical scope that we believe must be completed in order to keep the district running right now. And then down to level 1s, which are, their needs. They could be nice to haves. Maybe they are projects that could be forecasted in later years. Maybe they are coming, but they don't necessarily need to happen right now. So We can skip on to the next slide. So we wanted to explain how the costs have been calculated. As you've heard the different presentations from the district departments, you've heard numbers provided for the different scopes that have been covered. An example would be that you've heard us talk about roofs, and you've heard or maybe saw the number of 67 million associated with roofs in the district. Those numbers are based upon true contractor estimates. You can't just use that number when you're forecasting a project cost. There are other costs that you must account for in order to make those projects happen. And so the exercise that the district has gone through is going through the buildings and getting costs with different vendors. Technology got costs with their vendors, the same thing for security and safety, and all of the departments. They got true estimates for the scopes that they had identified. And then in the matrix, we applied the appropriate percentages to cover design and development costs that must be calculated to make sure that those projects can happen. When you're thinking about, and we'll get to this on the next slide as well, design and development, that could be your architect, permit fees, things like that. Then the last component that we have to forecast is escalation. We have a lot of projects, and it would be impossible for us to hit the ground running on day one and execute every single project that we've articulated. There's about 550 projects total that are associated with that $640 million project cost. And so we couldn't realistically do all those projects on day one. So we have to apply escalation. And so going through the projects, we have assigned 3 different escalation criteria, assuming that we could do many projects in that first year, more projects in a couple of years after that, and then we have to forecast the later projects. So we will try to we will do most of the projects as soon as possible, but there will be some that we have to forecast out further, which means that they will have more escalation. So the rule of thumb, and this is not to be, this has some wiggle room. When you're looking at a construction project, approximately 70% of your budget would go towards actual construction costs. So what it actually takes to build the project. The remaining 30% goes to those design and development costs, which is things like architects, permits, surveys, testing, your furniture, your equipment that you purchase. You're not going to have your contractor pay for equipment if the district can get a better rate. So that is the general approach to how you compose a project budget, but there is some flexibility. That does not include the escalation. Escalation is always applied at the end. And we talked about that. Any questions on this content? Yes.
I haven't seen yet administrative or project management costs on the part of the district to facilitate all of this. Is that already rolled in somewhere? Is that something over and above?
Yes. So the question for online was, where do the administrative costs and the project management costs get calculated? And that's part of that 30%, the design and development cost. So it is rolled into that overall calculation.
Brooke, can you give points to that? I know you talked about the prioritization matrix, like the scale of 1 to 4, and the different department heads and work stream heads talking through those, but can you just highlight a little bit about like how those conversations happened in rounds? And so like as that was all the project was shared with the BDC, feedback from the BDC, and how that factored into any adjustments as well.
Yeah. So the question was about how did we come up with the actual grading criteria or the scoring for each project? The departments at the beginning of this process had put together all of the different projects they had identified. Sorry, that's the same thing I said twice in a row. And with that, they provided scores that they felt were applicable to each project. As we have had our meetings with the BDC, we have taken all of the feedback that we have heard, and that has adjusted the project urgency. So an example would be with our security and our safety pieces. At the beginning, maybe there were some projects that we had identified as a lower score. An example of that would be with our doors and locks. Maybe it started, some of those were in like the level 1, level 2 ranges. But after we heard the BDC, those became a higher priority. So those are now listed as level 4. Any other questions? Perfect. All right. Easy.
Thanks, bro. And thanks. We just wanted to give an update, like just in terms of where this falls with the buckets we've been talking about as groups. As we started Spawn Development Committee looking at these strategic areas, we gave the caveat at the beginning that these are all equal size, equal measure right now, and just wanted to show how this is working through the process. So you'll see that these change when we look at just the level 4s to different relative sizes based off of the scope, based off the pricing of these projects as well. So just wanted to give you an example of that this evening as well, to see that when we're looking across these different buckets in all the level 4 currently, we have all these areas with representation there, and you'll see the various degrees of representation here as well. A big factor of that is just the cost in terms of what percent of that or amount this leads to. And so we'll, as we present packages with you in the final meeting, we'll be able to look at the relative size of these groups and what's represented in there and what's toggling between these different packages. But just wanted to give you this illustrative example of how this has worked throughout this process, just in case that's a helpful visual to kind of help see this come together too. Any other questions so far?
Lauren mentioned the weighted amounts, allocation amounts of things that might be nearer term, shorter life assets or investments versus longer pieces. That's something we don't need to worry about, but that will be accounted for in terms of the refined things and investment levels across the categories. Is that right?
I think I know.
Yes. Yeah. Did you want to take that?
Oh, if you got it, you got it.
Okay. Right now, as it stands, I don't believe there's any scenario that we would have that concern. There is no scenario. The bulk of our costs are associated with true construction needs. And even with our technology and some of the softwares and things, that's not going to be a factor.
Can I add to that?
Yeah.
So every project, all of those 500 plus projects that are in the matrix right now, they not only have already their level assigned to them, but they also have an estimate of when they would go, early, mid, late. So that assumed escalation has already been built in. So it's already factored in. Like if you yank a certain project out, like it might be a level 4 mid project. So that means it's going to happen in years 2 or 3. It's already had some escalation assigned to it. So it's already accounted for. Hopefully between those 2 answers, we gave you what you need. Any other questions? Oh, yeah.
A quick process question. Are we thinking more along the lines of doing it a la carte, that is, we're going to look at all the priorities and then pick the top ones and then see what the dollar amount is? Or are we going to pick a top dollar amount that we think is achievable when it goes to the elections and then figure out what priorities we can fit into that dollar amount? Kind of a cart horse kind
Yeah.
of question, if that makes sense.
I think that's a lot of what we're hoping that your table discussions help guide us in, because we can certainly bring them to you in different ways at our December meeting. And it sounds like maybe there is some appetite for seeing some versions that maybe go even a little bit beyond the 380 to capture a higher reality. And we can tease some of that out there. All along, in my mind anyway, I've been kind of thinking of there has to be this core group of projects, like the top 340, 350 million that's like, we really have to get this done. And where the choice points are going to come in is kind of those bolt-ons, what gets bolted onto that to bring us to whatever it is that our final dollar amount package is that we take out to the community. So I think those choice points are going to be those versions that we see that we then take out to the community for their feedback, and we do some polling on to hone down to our final recommendation.
Thank you. That's great.
Okay. So what we're going to do now is we're going to move into some group discussions here. So it's our turn to ask you some questions. So the first here is just in your group, you're going to get a chance to just share what we just discussed. Like, what are some of those bolt-ons? What are some of those things that you really want the BSC to keep in mind as they build out these packages to come forward for your review at the next meeting? And so I'm going to come around with the resource in just a bit that I'll grab actually right now. That'll be easier.
So hold it.
Thank you. So this is the consensus that we started looking at the last meeting, where we had each of the categories, and what the development committee had shared is like, hey, these echo with us as urgent. They seem really important to be able to address, or we would like to see included. And so this is a resource to help drive your discussion to say, hey, given what we've heard from different groups, given what we've shared is we agree that this is priority or some things we want to find out a little more. What do you hope that's kept in mind to bring those packages back towards you? And then the second question is understanding that you're going to be making some decisions as a group on what packages you want to push towards the community. What additional information do you need to make those decisions? So maybe there's some things that you're wondering, hey, I'm really wondering about the impacts of certain projects in terms of the spread. And I would like some more information on understanding, is this something for all schools? Is this something for some? Like, what are those different layers to help you make as informed a decision as possible? So please share what you would like there. And then those resources we'll also put together alongside those packages to really make that a valuable process and experience for you in this next meeting to help equip that decision making as well. And then this is another chance to just voice any other important considerations you have on your mind. So as was raised tonight, like, we have the opportunity to possibly poll and say, hey, is there appetite to possibly increase the amount by 100 million? If that's something you want to consider or something you want to voice is like, hey, we would recommend looking at that. Like, this is a great chance to voice that with your table leaders to be able to say, hey, we are curious if that's something that's palatable and if that's something that we can pull and find out more information on. And so we're going to move into about 25 minutes in this category to be able to discuss. And then we're going to do share out some highlights across the different groups. And so again, the steering committee, we're going to take this information that's captured from these conversations to really help drive this package formation and this process to set up a strong experience for you in this final meeting as a development committee.
I'm going to say maybe just consolidate down into 5 table groups. And then does that give us enough note takers at each of the 5 tables? My computer is running the meeting, so I can't necessarily note take unless I do it by hand, which is fine.
Yeah, we're good.
Can't forget, I got it.
And everyone in Zoom land, I'm going to be passing on to your note taker here in just a moment.
Hey, hi all. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, Evan, we can hear you.
Thanks, Billy Joe. Okay, sorry, I'm just moving to the hallway here. It was getting kind of loud in the conference room. But yeah, just want to open the floor for conversations just to capture our notes. I'll be capturing in our form here. I just dropped in chat the same packet that's at the tables in terms of that emerging consensus from the group. And so would love to hear just, what would you hope that the BSC keeps in mind as we start doing these packaging? And Carolyn, you dropped some great pieces there in the chat, and so appreciate you getting us started with that. But anything else that comes to mind there, please let me know. I'm happy to help capture some notes here or help answer any questions that I can. Feel free to come off mute or jump in chat too, if that's easier.
I'm going to jump off mute. Sorry, it took me a minute to get there. The thing I don't want to see happen is a focus on we're asking for this amount of money, and so this is what we can get with it. I think flipping the conversation to this is what our students need, this is what our staff needs, this is what our community needs, and here is the associated cost, is a different conversation than we have this much money to keep us equal.
Exactly.
And I know that from having done lots of bond things with the district, people want to know why you need it and don't keep coming back to them every couple of years. So I want to make sure that it's large enough without being excessive in the amount. Of course, we have to pay attention to the dollar amount, but they want to make sure that we're meeting our needs. And I think it's obvious, but if we don't say it and if we don't communicate it with very quick visuals, some of the issues that if we don't make the investment in our buildings and in the safety of our students and our staff and our community, our buildings we won't keep those values up. And so we need to make sure that we're taking and being good stewards with what we have. So I just hope that the conversation really flips to what we need and why we need it.
Definitely. Really appreciate that. Thank you for jumping in and giving voice to that. Perfect. And thank you for echoing that, Mary Kay, as well.
Then if we kept the cost at what has been in the past, I think I heard $1.97. What would that be as far as the dollar amount for the bond if we kept it generally the same?
Yeah, generally the same would be around 100 million more. And so that's what we're saying is like we can work with the consulting team to help kind of pull the palatability to help get that extra cushion, especially with, as was shared, like flipping the conversation and saying, hey, we know that it's going to be this amount. It would give us probably up to $100 million more.
And one more question. What was the amount to cover all the cost of the things brought to the table?
Yeah, so all things brought to the table of all levels was around 640.
Evan, when would the matrix be shared with us?
Yeah, so that's partly what we're trying to get a sense of is like what views it would be helpful to see in terms of splicing those, and then we'll be sharing that with Brooke and the Turner and Townsend and Heary team to be able to help make sure the matrix is set up to be able to do that, because right now it's just a matrix with truly everything included, and we're trying to pare it down to make it as digestible as possible based off of what people are wanting to see in terms of the views. And so that's something that we'll have those views available in the December meeting to be able to look at.
Do we ever seek alternative options for receiving money, whether it's donations from businesses within Hillsboro and the district?
Yeah, so that's something that is a great question. I can float that specifically with Scott to get his response there. I know that partnerships and being able to look at alternative funding streams is always a big effort and priority, but I know that Scott can speak to that more concretely. I don't have the information to be able to give the full answer to that. But I think that's a huge piece to flag, to be able to say, hey, as we're looking at these, has that been considered when thinking about the different levels and priorities of these projects, especially when we're thinking about what students, staff, and the community need.
Or what kind of negotiations happen with the contractors for the costs of this stuff too? Like, is there any wiggle room on that?
Yeah, no, it's a great question to see where the efforts are there.
And then how do we reassess? Oh, sorry. How do we reassess, like, if these are estimates and then let's say we are overestimating X amount of dollars, how do we reassess that money? I'm assuming that we can pull in other projects that may not have been in, that could be in then.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. A key piece of that is being able to look across the priorities to say, like, okay, like we know based off of what student, staff, and community needs, this is the cost. We know what we can go for, and being able to say that we know that these are the core priority projects, and then these are the ones that we would like to say, like, if we have that ability with any sort of contingencies that don't get used, or if there's overestimates and money available, we really want to start bringing these in with that component as well. That's part of what gets kind of on the back end in terms of communicating, making sure that the bond language is crafted in a way that gets the ability for those projects to come in as well.
You can't just do a project that you didn't identify. So, as you said, it's really important to not be vague, but to have that statement that these are the additional projects that, if funding is available, that gives you that flexibility to do that.
That way.
Is there an issue with, I know that we have to use, I think the district still has to use prevailing wage, don't they?
I believe so. That's partly what determines who we can get quotes from in the contracts as well. Yeah.
Erin, could you share what that is?
Yeah, prevailing wage is, you have to make sure that, number one, I believe it impacts, sorry, it's been a few years since I've had to do that, but using union shops, using a rate that's identified by within the region for major construction. I know that's not complete, but that's kind of the gist of it. You can't just go out and hire your neighbor who's going to undercut the price, and then you kind of get what you get. So there is a prevailing wage scale that has to be met. And it's, it's for a lot of good reasons, but sometimes people feel really disgruntled about it, but I think it's kind of a good idea. So.
And the only piece I would add to that, Carolyn, is sometimes that involves a consideration about insurance and certain benefits and guarantees they have for employees within those rate wages as well.
Correct.
So, yeah.
I feel like I'm kind of monopolizing this, but the only other thing that really I see a lot of value in is making sure that we aren't top heavy in one thing. I see the value in maintaining our buildings, but I don't want to go for a bond that's only roofs, for example, or only in one area. And my number 3 is the most important in terms of helping to select, because we always think about, well, what will the parents want? What would they go for? But parents are not very good voters. They are the least demographic from all past bonds in however many years. And so if we only go for what we think parents would go for, and we aren't looking at who our, demographic voters are, we have to make sure that our packages have messaging that meets those people. So that's a really important one to me.
Yeah, and I'll just kind of jump in from the polling perspective. I know that Beth has mentioned that quite a bit, and maybe Evan, but part of what we do when we get to a point when we're doing a poll in our community is that we poll a universe, is what we call it, of likely voters for that specific election. So we'll test messaging, price and cost sensitivity, the bond packages that this team develops with voters, a group of folks in your community, a random sample, but that is reflective of the people that would show up in that election, so that we have, just like Carolyn mentioned, a more representative idea of the voters' opinion, rather than, obviously we know that we have, like, we call them like our evangelists, our choir, that, our parents, our key core supporters that we know are going to probably more likely support a bond measure.
Thank you, Kelly.
There's a question on the dollar amounts again, just so I'm clear. 640 million for all the needs, right?
That's all needs. So that's things that came up in all presentations. It's also some things that, like, for example, I know it was kind of on and off, half jestingly shared, like, oh, a pool, like doing those, like even those pieces that came up are factored into that cost as well.
Okay, then we have 380 million as the consideration right now. Is that right?
380 million in terms of what we heard from Piper Sandler this evening, where we're looking at and saying, okay, like when we think about critical needs to be able to keep the district functioning and buildings going, and understanding that we're touching on each of these areas, the 380 is that pool primarily, but there's the opportunity, as Kelly was sharing, with kind of working with sample groups and projected voters to be able to pull, is there palatability for a bit more. And when we know that we're talking about a bit more without violating commitments and previous values driven approaches with voters that the district has had, there's opportunity to possibly get 100 million more that might give us opportunity to really push past that core group of needed projects.
So that was what my next question is what is the current bond that was passed? Is that sunsetting soon? And this is could we basically replace it?
Yes. So that one's phasing out, and this would be a new bond coming in.
Okay. So is that 380 going to be basically dollar for dollar, or are you saying that there might be palatable, the voters might be okay with more because that might not increase their taxes, as they say?
I think that's what we're going to have to do some polling to see what that is. But there's possibility to go that route if there's palatability for it, and if it's something that the committee's saying, hey, given what we know matters to staff, students, and community, we really want to try to push more on that. And if those pieces come in alignment together, then there would be opportunity to do that. And
then if we replaced the bond rate, then it would basically be no increase. But if we go with the 380, there would be a slight deduction in the tax. Is that at the end of the day?
Compared to where it has been historically, yes.
Yeah. Okay. Good. Just trying to get an understanding of that, just from what I understand there. And that then goes to, if I can go back to the questions that you're really looking forward to answer. What are things to keep in mind as they build out the package options? It'd be good to see those a little bit closer, how that would look like for the voters and what it would mean if we went with a little bit less, with a little bit more. The other thing I didn't see in any of the matrix that's very detailed, the one thing that I've seen get missed in bonds is work that's triggered by other work that gets missed. It'd be good to see if there's projects that trigger offsite work that's not directly related to the schools, but it's going to be required by the city or the county, those types. I mean, Hillsboro School District covers a lot more than just the city of Hillsboro. So there's things that are a little bit outside of our control, if you will, beyond the city. So those are the things I wanted to make sure that those are added in.
Yeah, that's a great piece. And I would say like that's something that we can make sure we have brought in with the next meeting as well. So I have that flagged. Like you said, it would likely be from Washington County there. But another example of that too is like work that's triggered by other work too, is we also, when Turner and Townsend Erie does these projections, they also know from their experience, hey, when we work in buildings of this age and do work like this, we also know that there might be some additional work that could be planned for or unplanned for, such as abatement or other factors that could come up. Kind of if you think of it like as a remodel of your home, if somebody opens the wall, there might be something that you don't know till you get there, and so that gets brought in as part of that escalation or contingency planning as well. So there are factors to think about work getting triggering other work like that as well, too, just to give voice to that.
Yeah, really great.
Yeah. Great questions.
Yeah, I think I would echo the comment of let's try to eat away at the needs instead of just kicking them down the road. Because if they're truly needs,
yes,
that's a different conversation than a want.
Thank you, John.
Mm-hmm.
Is there like a calculator that people can estimate their costs from their assessed value of their homes?
I would imagine there is somewhere.
I can kind of speak to that, but usually, when we just determine like the actual bond rate, then, it's that, let's say, for example, it's Evan right now, it's $1.97 or $1.92. Yeah. So it's that per thousand of a taxable assessed value. So let's say if your home was worth $200,000 taxable assessed value, not real market value. So what you pay taxes on, not what Zillow says. Then you would take that $1.97 times 200, right? Because it's per thousand of taxable assessed value. And, we can definitely like different districts. We've worked with different districts who have created calculators like that, or, when you kind of break it down in that way, it kind of helps folks understand. But the biggest issue for people, I will say, that we have to consistently remind folks that it is taxable assessed value, not real market value, because everyone, especially in Oregon, our home values have increased dramatically in the last decade. And so people are like, oh, my home is worth, Zillow says it's worth this, or Redfin, or whatever it might be. And they're in their mind calculating this bond based on that number rather than what they're paying their taxes on.
I know that the district has had calculators for other bonds, and it's been very, very specific about go to your tax statement and pull this number.
Yes.
Plug it in here, and then this is what it would be. And, so there is a way to do that by providing information only, not by encouraging, which the district can't.
Right.
Do.
Exactly. Hey, y'all, we're going to, I think, come back together, whole group here. So if there's any additional thoughts, please feel free to share them in the chat. I'll also drop my email here in the chat too. If there's anything you wanted to connect on or share, please don't hesitate to reach out. But we're going to get back together, whole group here. But thank you very much for the discussion, and we'll be right in.
I'll just show an example of when we're talking about priorities. With the roofing discussion, how those projects are not necessarily in a lump grouping. They're not scored the same way. So there's been a lot of effort that has gone in to the scoring. Each project has been identified as its own project. So in this example, that's perfect. Great. Yep. So as you can see in this view, you see in column A, there's the site, and then you have your feeder school, your scope, which is obviously the roofing. And then as you go to the right in column J, that's where we have focused on the actual score. Each project has its own unique score. So when we're talking about roofing, we haven't said all of the roofs are a level 4. So some of them are level 4s, some of them are 3s, 2s. I think we've got one or so maybe as a level 1. So that is just helpful to understand, I think. And I wanted to make sure that was clear. Every single project has its own unique critical score. So I think with that, Evan, are you wrapping up? Or we're doing maybe the report out?
Quick share out.
Yeah. Quick share outs. Who would like to volunteer to report out for their tables? All right. Scott.
Okay, things that the table wanted to make sure were noted or might be useful in future or just prioritized. You know, I wouldn't leave the entire list. It's quite a bit here, but there was also some interest, by the way, where the school board sits. I think on the bond presentation on maybe going higher than the 380 and also potential of a local option lobbies. It was noted that, you know, Hillsboro doesn't have one of our sister districts here in the area. Does the spreadsheet have the life of projects was a discussion? So in addition to when we might plan to initiate the project, there are also projects that are relatively quick and short term, and those proceeds, like buying equipment, for example, those proceeds might shorten the bond cycle. And we sort of thought through some of that with some of the planning question. Teachers, a lot of discussion about how we handle replacement cycle of like computers. A lot of times those are on the bond for things like teaching, but sometimes if an office staff, there's an issue with their PC or piece of equipment that just has to come out of the building fund. That feels like it's not as well planned as it could be, and that might be something to consider, like how we're handling some of those things with the range budget. Are we prioritizing investments that improve kids' educational experience over other areas of investment? Priority some of those to the table. Nutrition services, as we upgrade and prioritize a better quality of equipment and investments, are we also looking at the flow? A lot of kids don't even have time to get a hot lunch because it's very, constrained by the number of kids trying to move through. And so not just should we evaluate, the equipment that's better, but also think about the flow and how we can improve the student experience for meals. There's a lot of things. I'll give others a chance, but that's a flavor of this discussion.
Great. Okay. If anyone else wants to start getting ready to come on up, we'll stack up.
A few highlights.
Yep.
Few highlights. To the left.
Yeah.
An ask is time to review the data before the next meeting. The circles were really informative, but really digging in and looking at the spreadsheet, the number 4s. Question that came up, a concern maybe something that's a number 2 now. Will it be a number 4 in 15 years? And should we be looking at the 2s and the 3s as well? Same conversation about, potentially the polling piece about, what would it look like if we were to ask for the 480 instead of the 380. There was conversation about Title IX issues and making sure we're looking at our batting cage. If the batting cage is a level 2, we should be looking at that closely through a lens of Title IX as well as ADA bathrooms. There was a conversation about partnerships, and that's a great way to maximize our dollars. So how can we reach out to our partners in the community and see how we can stretch the dollar that would benefit our students and the community in general. And then we talked about what would excite our voter base. So and making sure that we're giving our students a competitive edge. So things like safety, turf, auditoriums, playgrounds, areas that are public facing where the community that may not have children in our school, but maybe have grandchildren, or can access and really enjoy our facilities is a highlight. that we should be capitalizing on. And then also, how do we articulate this bond would be freeing up general fund dollars that could be reinvested in our students in other ways? Right now, they're using a lot of building funds. I had a principal at my table to really address issues that should be addressed by these needs, but we just don't have the funds to do it. So those are just some highlights.
That's easy to follow because we echo all of that. 3 additional pieces that came up at our table was one, in the conversation of getting by with the critical core 4s plus looking at more. We had asked the BSC to think about how else can we be competitive in terms of both perception and service delivered to other adjacent districts. And when we look at the rate amount, what is overall revenue amounts to? So trying to look beyond that with some of those additional bolt-ons, as Beth mentioned. Back to the tables, I think this was about one of the groups too, is I think it was columns C, J, and R that kind of broke out what was the item, what was the scoring number, and then having some dollar valuations with it would be really helpful, especially as we're asked to take things that like are on the handout, but then prioritize them against each other, especially those 3s, 2s, and 1s. Can we get that in advance of the next meeting and have a further conversation if you really want that type of preference and prioritization from the group? Hope I captured everything else. I mean, say to cut most of ours. Thanks.
I think the only thing that we had that was maybe different was just ask for polling of the community. If the level 4s are truly 380, we should poll the community to see if there's capacity to go further. Did that summarize? Okay. And then do you want to report out?
I can do. So I was just reminding my table group that prior to the 2017 bond, our bond before that was in 2006. So that was an 11-year lead up to the 2017 bond. This time around, it's only been 9 years, which is nice, but we still have a lot of needs. The way it's structured moving forward is that we would have another 11-year gap between this ask and the next opportunity where there would be a natural drop in rates. So that could also be another talking point for why we would be asking for a higher bond amount. And then just, I think it's already been talked about here, but just one of the points brought up by my table was highlighting the ways that improvements we make can also benefit the larger community, because there is a lot of community use of our facilities is probably going to be a pretty important thing for those folks who don't currently have kids in schools. Evan, do you want to share some of the online comments?
Thanks, Beth. Yeah, so a lot of it was echoed in terms of what's already been shared. I think the big piece was really saying, as we're looking at these numbers, it's easy to start saying, okay, here's cost figures to play with, but really just making sure we're focusing on the messaging. We know this is what students, staff, and community need, and we know this is the associated costs with that. So making sure that we're really driving that into the selection process was a big call as well. And then in terms of the partnerships, just really thinking creatively about, like, are we sure that there aren't other funding streams that might be something that could impact the level of priority as well that we're looking at. But those are a couple big pieces that were echoed and some nuances on my community here. Yeah.
This, the list of the level 4s at the 380, are those all determined by the district? These are catastrophic needs for level 4, for one. And then that's wraps into the question of, if that is what your suggestions are, is that, where is the wiggle room? Why are we here?
Yeah. So let me give you just a little of my thinking about the current level 4s and what I have gone back and asked my colleagues to help do, is that they are still captured in entire projects. For example, the things that, like computer replacements for staff and students, right? I think Derek's ask includes multiple rounds of replacements to hopefully get us over throughout that 11-year span between when we're going to reasonably able to ask again, right? We might decide what's absolutely the most critical is that we get through the first round, for example. Like, keep that in a level 4, but maybe move the subsequent replacements into a level just a half step down. Maybe the bus replacements, maybe years 1 through 3 are absolutely critical. Level 4, we need to do that. But maybe years 4 through 7 are a little bit more discretionary, right? The print shop right now, what would be in that 380 is kind of the full scale. Let's go for the print shop, which we think is great because it allows us to have an ROI in just a handful of years. But, there's ways to break that up too, where it's like, maybe it's a $7 million investment in equipment and, we just retrofit some of the spaces we already have. So there is some refinement to be done. And I think those are the kinds of choice points that are really helpful for this group to consider. And we would have to be doing that if we had no other option but being down at a $311 million level, right? I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility that we have to make some of those truly difficult decisions, but I think we need to understand a little more clearly where those are, where are those choice points, and how do we make them? And so that's some of the refinement that we're going to be working on in between this meeting and our December 3rd meeting. Does that help a little bit or not really? Marginally. It marginally helps. Yes, of course.
And maybe this is related, are all level 4s equal? That is, if it's within a department, there's 4, 3, 2, 1 within the department, but has there been any triage or critical analysis of the relative differences between like a level 4 roof that's going to start leaking next year feels different than maybe a level 4 in another department,
right?
Where we could move on
for
the next 5 years without that.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right, and I think that is some of the consideration, because if we want examples that are both going to keep us right at 380, and then maybe ones that go a little bit beyond, I think we are going to have to look critically at what is considered a level 4 and come up with different variations of what's actually included in that list, and then what are some other things that get added in? And those might be from other priority designations, because we believe that those will help us sell the bond to our community. So it's not just a slam dunk of, well, there are no choice points, it's just going to be all the level 4s. That's not how this is going to roll out. I think what you'll probably see is kind of what I mentioned earlier, like we're going to do everything we can to whittle that must-have core lists, like these are the absolutes, that's more like at the 340-ish level. And then I think where our discretion is going to come in is for that last either 40 or plus million, depending on what our comfort level is for the overall bond package. I think we have to do that to have fidelity to this process, and also to be able to answer to our constituents when we go out. Anything else?
Thanks for your time, everybody.
Thank you so much. We'll see you on December 3rd.